Okay, this is just looking at typologies and explaining the concept and the ideas behind typologies and things that we might actually do with this. So let's just get started. It's a few slides, but I'll try and not linger too long on any one. Okay, so this is task 2, typologies. It's to do with the collections and the derive. Week 2, part 1. So this is a stamp collection, but the difference about this is it's definitely, it's a typology of sorts, but there's no conclusion drawn from it. Really what it is a collection, much in the way that this is not really a typology, this is a collection. There is an element of typology about them, but these are collectors' things. These are things people have just collected stuff together. Here's a collection of Rubik's Cubes. What makes the difference between a collection and a typology? Well, a typology is the definition, it's quite helpful, is study or analysis or classification based on types or categories. So it suggests some level of analysis, some suggestion of meaning, whereas perhaps these don't really have any meaning, they're just collections. Hopefully that makes you can understand the difference there. This bit at the bottom, a doctrine of theological type, definitely not that. We're going to start looking at somebody called Francis Galton, who, when you look at typologies, you'll often see this person talked about. He's 1822 to 1911. He certainly is an interesting person. We'll get to some other thoughts about him in a second. But it's interesting that here is a photo of him front and side. Maybe think of this as being almost like he's been arrested. He's not, but he was quite a brilliant man in many ways. He was actually the cousin of Charles Darwin, who obviously is responsible for ideas about evolution. Francis Galton discovered, invented the whole concept of fingerprints. So he's quite important here. And again, if you look at this sort of thing, it's suggesting typologies, collections, but they have meaning because this is about identifying an individual person. And this thing about identifying people through physical characteristics is something that went right the way through everything that he did. Interestingly, he also invented the weather map. So here is some very early weather maps trying to make sense of wind patterns and barometric pressures. But again, if you look at this in terms of the collections and typologies and meaning, this is quite an interesting collection of images. He was also involved a lot with photography. This is very early photography. So these are collections of faces. And on the left, I don't know if you can guess what these people are, and the ones on the right. The ones on the right, perhaps a bit easier to understand what they are. They're military officers. And in the centre, using early photographic technology, the fact that there were glass negatives, he was trying to work out if there's any characteristic that makes an officer. So the figure in the middle is actually a composite of all of these people, trying to identify some meaning about what makes up. Is there anything consistent? What's the average of what an officer might be? The people on the left are actually doctors, the physicians. So this is trying to identify the characteristics, facial characteristics of what makes up a doctor. Okay, interesting ideas. Okay, this is a piece from this year by an artist-musician called Holly Herndon. In this video, that's about as close as you get to see what Holly Herndon is, but you can see why I've put it in. It's very much a sort of a contemporary realisation of those photos. She's layering up sounds as well, so she's not just layering up video, she's layering up sounds, and interesting person who I will show you lots of Holly Herndon as we move on. Going back to Francis Galton, this is where things slightly begin to get a little bit more edgy, perhaps. On the top, we have prevalent types of features among men convicted of larceny without violence. So these are composites. So on the top left is 5 composites, then 7, then 4, then 2. And this is trying to identify what a criminal looks like. On the bottom, we have officers. So this is the start of actually stereotyping. And he did lots of this, more of the physicians, more of the military. I didn't mean to put these in. Combinations of portraits, again. On the top right, types of features common among men convicted of crimes of violence. Trying to work out if there's a way to identify a criminal by what they look like, which obviously has contemporary resonance. This is criminals' ears, trying to work out if you can identify criminals from the shape of their ears. Interesting images, and definitely typologies with meaning. They're not just collections, but obviously slightly dubious. Even more dubious, this is an attempt to identify what a German looks like, from a German woman in particular. And obviously this is very, very, this is on the edge of racial stereotyping. He also, among the other things he invented, he was credited with the development of eugenics, which is what led Hitler to take the path that he did. Talking about the Nazis, here is, I don't know if you can see it just in the bottom, this is the Jewish type. So this is Galton trying to identify literally racial stereotypes. And obviously these sorts of images became very prevalent in the Holocaust. So interesting images, terrible person, terrible ideas. The meaning is obviously awful. And when we talk about racial stereotyping and racial profiling, this is the root of it. But let's move on from the bad side. Let's talk about Plato. Plato had the Platonic ideal. He had this idea about the essence, and in the Republic he talked about the ideal bed. He said that there was something that was inherently bed, and that lives in our minds, and we know what it is. And what a sculptor or a craftsman does is tries to make a copy of that ideal bed that lives in your head. What a painter does is he paints a picture of the craftsman's bed, and so the painter was the bottom of the thing. But the idea somewhere that there is an ideal that we understand is what maybe some of those attempts from Galton were trying to do. They're trying to identify the essence of something. I'm interested in the idea that if you asked a child to draw a house, this is the house they draw, especially the ones on the top row. And yet there is no house that exists that look like that. But we all know that that's a house, and that's what a child thinks of a house. If you have to ask a child to draw a car, they draw, I think that's a larder. You probably don't know what a larder is, but they draw a car, and this is the idea. This is the Platonic ideal of a car, and to some extent, this is what typologies are all about. So these are some artists, 1931 to 2015, a husband-wife couple. They did lots of these typologies, and in particular, they did it with industrial buildings. But the idea of trying to work out what is the essence of the mine. I'm trying to work it out as the mine winches, and you can see the similarities. We all understand what it is, but not one of them is identical. Not two. Water towers. We all know what water towers are, and these are sort of water towers, industrial quarry buildings. It's about working out the similarities in these cases. More water towers. Factories, industrial plants, all from different places, but there's all something in common right the way through, and it's about identifying and pulling out the meaning of these. This is an artist called Donovan Wiley. If I just tell you what this is, obviously visually there's a consistency and you understand what it is, but this is in Northern Ireland there's a prison, the Maze prison, and these are the individual cells, and obviously what he's done is he's photographed them from as close to the same position as possible, and we're beginning to get a sense of what the Maze prison is all about. Now, so on the previous one, the context is really important. In this case, there's something that pulls them together, and it's the orange tray. So at top left, we've got a cracker and 6 bottles of Coke. We've got some fruit. We've got a burger and some eggs and a coffee, I guess. Then we've got fried chicken, baked beans, fries, chocolate milkshake. Then just a single olive. We've got an onion and some chewing gum and some Coke. Some ice cream, donut and a milkshake, and just some cigarettes. They're very attractive images, and as a set they look very attractive, but where is the meaning, the context? You need to understand what the context is. Well, the context of this is that these were all the final meals that were requested before execution. Okay, so these are the meals that people asked for. So there's a typology that is all about the meaning. Again, similarly, you need to understand what the context of these are. The column on the left are soldiers before they went for their first tour of Afghanistan. The middle set is, the middle column is while they're on tour in Afghanistan. And the final column on the right is when they've returned from Afghanistan. So this is all about comparing the change. So again, interesting set to do with meaning. This is a set, it was for a charity. These are all homeless people in LA, I believe. But consistency of the portraiture, and again, the meaning is, you need to know the meaning for them to have the weight that they have. So meaning is important. In this case, obviously, apes. I'm saying they're apes, but this is all about comparing, seeing the similarities, and obviously it immediately draws the comparison to ourselves and understanding that as well. So in all of these, there are the things that are to do the meaning that are really important for you to understand about typologies. One is considering the relationships. So the top right with the apes is all about building up the relationships between the images. Another approach is to look at comparisons. So the comparison in the middle between the pre-Afghanistan, after Afghanistan, it's the comparison that matters. And lastly is context. So the bottom image is all about understanding the fact that these were the final meals of people that were about to go and be put to death in America. There are some things to consider that will help you when you do these, just to consider. One is the environment. So for instance, the consistency of the photographs on the bottom right, the way they're presented. There are some issues with the middle one where the lighting is very, very slightly different, that slightly throws the comparison. And the last thing is the format, how you present them. In this case, very rigidly laid out in grids. These are just some examples. I think that mostly on the whole, these do not have the meaning, but they do have the consistency of the presentation. So some airplanes, some guitar picks, some cameras. This does have meaning because this is all one person's set of cameras, all of which were broken. So it's one person's broken cameras. Sorry about the quality of some of these images. I just lifted these from the web. Some little toy ornaments. Some brightly coloured beach huts. Locks. I think it's quite easy to read meaning into locks. So that's quite a good set. Some drinks. Beautiful things. This one I think does have some meaning that's worth considering. All of these, well, obviously it's the same image repeated, but the 12 people all described themselves as being obsessed with grunge music. So if you took this as grunge. I think this also has meaning. So again, I repeated it just to cover the image, but this is personal calculators from the mid-70s, early 80s. So there's some sense about the design style here. These are all doors in Islington, so the meaning is there. It says something about the doors in Islington. It says something about Islington. There's a lot you can gain from that. Some more doorways. I think they're Venice. I hate Jeremy Clarkson, and so should you. But when they ran Top Gear on BBC before they moved to Amazon and I can't remember Grand Tour, is it? They had an interesting thing which is called the Cool Wall, and they had cars that they said they would discuss, and they would put things that were very cool on the right and things that were really uncool on the left. And it was a way of sorting and categorizing. So you could have done all of these cars by colour, by red. You could have done them by family car versus sports car. There's all sorts of different ways you could have done them. But they did it cool to uncool. This is it's in my house, and the shelf third down. It's a long time since we even owned a DVD player, but we have lots of DVDs. And when it came to me arranging them on a shelf, I didn't really know how to do them. Do we arrange them to try and make them easy to find by title or actor? Well, you can see that what I actually did was colour. I organised them in colour order. Impossible to find anything, but it looks nice on the shelf. They've slightly got mixed up since. A really nice Russian typology of biscuits. And I just thought we'd finish on this one. I don't know how many of these you can identify. I'm saying top left is a Rollo. Second down on the right, the far right, I think is a Mars bar. I think we've got a Bounty bottom left, a Topic. I think we've got a Lion bar. Anyway, so the Kit Kat at the bottom, is it? I'm not sure. Anyway, chocolate bar typology. And obviously here is something taken out into a sort of more graphic, illustrative approach. We'll just watch this Pecha Kucha. What I really want to talk about now, in relation to the task that I want you to do in the lesson, is Evan Roth. Evan Roth is an artist, designer, coder, really interesting person, a massive back catalogue of really amazing ideas-led experimental communication ideas, projects. Okay, and I just tell you a bit about him. One of his projects was called Badass Motherfucker, and it was a test to see if he could get himself his own website to the top of the search lists if you typed in Badass Motherfucker. So it's a long time ago, so it no longer works completely. But let's just type in to. I'm gonna go to Google because originally he did it with Google.com. And the project was documenting the process of how you got to that stage. So if we just type in and see where it is. I say this is probably about 12 years old now, this project. But so he's not there. He's not number 1, not number 2, not number 3, but not number... Here we go. He's 1, 2... Right, he's 1, 2, 3, 4... He's 5th now. And this is 10 years ago. So if you type in Badass Motherfucker, you get his website. Okay, he's an interesting person with lots of projects like that. If we just go through and have a look at some others.
One night to be confused, one night to speed up truth. We had a promise paid, 4 hands and then away. Both under influence, we had divine sense to know what to say. Mind is a razor blade to call for hands of above, to lean on. Would it be good enough for me now? much. One night to push and scream, and then relief. 10 days of perfect tunes, the colors red and blue. We had a promise made, we were in love. To call for hands of above, to lean on, wouldn't be good enough for me. To call for hands of above, to lean on, wouldn't be good enough. And you knew the hand of the devil, and you kept us awake with closed teeth, sharing different heartbeats in one life. To call for hands of above, to lean on, wouldn't be good enough for me now. To call for hands of above, to lean on, wouldn't be good enough.
It was a project where he got some very cheap LEDs and a resistor, because you need a resistor with an LED, and some of those watch batteries and a magnet. He sellotaped them together and made thousands of them, and then they went out to various spaces that had metal on steel on the outside of the buildings in that video, and basically threw them up until they stuck. And so they were out of reach, they couldn't be removed. The lithium batteries they used last about 6 weeks. And so for about 6 weeks, these buildings were just covered in coloured lights. Okay, really nice project. They did similar things with trams in Austria. They just threw these things onto trams. I'll just show you a couple of examples that are more to do with typologies. So this is a typology of graffiti. So he went out into New York and Paris and photographed and isolated an entire alphabet. So here is his S's, and the whole thing is there. So you can go through, there's a full alphabet, and he's just isolated. Really nice project. It is literally a typology. He's called it taxonomy, but it's a typology of graffiti. And just underneath it, you can see it shows it in context. So here's the S in context. Really nice project. This one, another typology. There are 256 colours on the web that actually have names, like red, blue, light brown. And what he's done here is he's laid them all out as strips in alphabetical order. So every named HTML colour displayed in alphabetical order. It's a typology. However, the one that I really want to show you is this project. He does lots of stuff with airlines and going on airplanes and doing slightly disruptive art projects and design projects with airlines. But in this case, this is Sky Mail is the magazine you get on, I don't know which airline it is, one of the American airlines. So it's the in-flight magazine. And what he's been doing is he's been going on these flights, and he took, this is 2009, I believe. He tore out every single face out of the magazine and arranged them, all the white faces on the left and all the non-white faces on the right. So this is a typology with a clear meaning, message that is drawn out of this approach. This is 2012, obviously a smaller magazine. This is what he does on his flights. Here's Apple products versus non-Apple products. So The task in class is that I would like you to do a magazine typology using the magazine that you've brought in. And I'd like to see if we can use some coloured paper, which I'll provide. If not, you need to work out a way to do it if you're working remotely. Use them as background. And what I'd really like to try and get portfolio-worthy photos. These could be potentially with your phone, but I would like you to try and see if you can use a camera and get good, better quality ones. And I'm after at least 3 variants out of the same magazine. So just as a suggestion, it could be, if you're doing it with faces, you could do the white, non-white. You could do blonde, non-blonde. You could do old, young. I don't know what point you split that off, or maybe you just do it as a continuum and you try and lay them out in, and you see the swell and you see the meaning will come out of the marketing and who the magazine is aimed at. So, excuse me, old. Then task 2 is then there's a separate video for that. I don't know if that went on too long. If not, if it did, sorry. Let's just go through and do this. Okay, cheers, bye.